What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations. And firstly, I want to say thank you for all love and support, and thank you for exploring the perspectives of social change with me on this platform. I want to encourage you all to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast listen platform. And make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you're loving the Deep Dish Conversations. I appreciate all of the support again. I hope you all enjoy this episode. District Attorney Glenn Funk, how you doing?
Doing great. Good to be here today.
I'm glad that you're here. Welcome to the platform.
And nice to be here.
How was your weekend?
It was really good.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'm excited to get into this. As I often tell a lot of people, I believe the district attorney is the most, powerful person in our criminal legal system here in Davidson County. So I think it's important. This election is important. 8 years is a long time of importance, and we got to get this right for the city.
For sure.
And so just to dive in, many people know you as District Attorney Glenn Funk for the past 8 years here in Nashville. But let's get into your background and just your criminal attorney and just your history in this journey and this path that, led you to this point as District Attorney that people may not know about.
Sure. I graduated from law school in 1985. My first job as a lawyer was to work in the public defender's office in Memphis. The public defender at the time was A.C. Wharton, who later on became mayor of Memphis. Great experience there. I knew that I wanted to end up in Nashville, and the elected DA at the time was a man named Tom Shriver. And General Shriver had told me that once I passed the bar, the first available job he would be making an offer to me. So I worked in Memphis in 1985 and into January of 1986, and the job became open, so I came here. Worked as an assistant district attorney for 3.5 years, and then left and went into private practice, and I was in private practice doing criminal defense for 25 years. In 2014, my predecessor, Torrey Johnson, retired, and I ran for this office and was elected. My time early in my career was really important because representing indigent people who were charged with crime in Memphis gave me a perspective and an understanding that informs me today as far as what people go through when they're charged with crimes, especially those who are maybe from an underserved population or somebody who's suffering from poverty. I took that with me and those lessons with me to the district attorney's office, and as an assistant district attorney, I think that made me more compassionate, more empathetic, better able to understand that the power that I had as an assistant district attorney should be used wisely and in an attempt to make sure that the community was safe, but not in an attempt to just punish folks or to over-incarcerate people. When I left the district attorney's office and spent 25 years in private practice, I continued to learn more lessons about what brought people into the system to begin with, what supports they needed in order to be successful. I learned through 25 years how we were over-incarcerating people, how we were prosecuting the wrong crimes and sometimes the wrong people in ways that was not promoting community safety, was instead driving the community apart by having the criminal justice system become a wedge for our community. So when I ran for district attorney, I remembered what I was told on my very first day in the office by Tom Shriver back in January of 1986, which was that the most important part of being a district attorney is to know the difference between a bad person and a good kid in trouble. When I said that in 2014, it resonated with Nashville because I think Nashville kind of understands that the criminal justice system should be about stopping violent crime and then giving supports to people who might need a second chance.
Right.
So 2014, that's what I said. That's, political consultants told me, no, I need to come across as the biggest, baddest, toughest, meanest guy in the room. I said, that's not who I am. I don't think that's who Nashville is. In 2014 election cycle, that's what I said. That's how I defined myself. And that's what I've tried to live up to as the district attorney. It was really 2016 and 2018 election cycles when people started talking about criminal justice reform. And, when I heard those, I was essentially listening to that and saying, well, that's what I've been about. That's really what my campaign was based on. Maybe that's a better slogan. But I think my platform that I ran on actually kind of captured the feeling, and maybe even in a deeper way than just saying the terms criminal justice reform. A lot of people can say criminal justice reform, but not really have any concept of how that can actually impact people. We've seen, even Governor Lee ran on a platform of criminal justice reform, but there have been very few reforms that have actually come out of the state government over the last 4 years.
And so, what role do you believe that the district attorney plays in that reform part of criminal justice reform?
I think the district attorney is the linchpin for criminal justice reform, because under our Constitution, the district attorney has the power to bring charges, has the power to then seek a sanction if they go forward on a charge. And the district attorney can make the decision, is this something where we just need treatment? Is this something where we need probation? Is this a crime where we need incarceration? How long of an incarceration do we need? And the way our system's built up, we give that power to one person, the elected district attorney, and then that elected district attorney hires other assistant district attorneys to fulfill the vision of the district attorney. But we don't want to give that kind of power to any one person in our republic, right? We want to make sure that there are checks and balances on the prosecutor's power. And so we have a commissioner that may or may not grant a warrant. We have a general sessions judge who might determine whether the person's guilty or innocent, or whether a case should be bound over to the grand jury. We make sure we have defense attorneys for every person who's charged with a crime.
Right.
And we have meaningful constitutional hearings where the citizen accused has due process.
Right.
We have a grand jury that determines whether or not an indictment should issue. We have a criminal court judge and a jury to determine whether or not the state has proven their case. And then we have appellate judges at the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of checks on the prosecutor's power.
Right.
But even with all those checks, a prosecutor still holds immense power. And so prosecutorial discretion is important. Where do you prioritize cases? Right. Some of the issues I've had with the legislature over the last couple of years is where they're trying to tell me to prosecute. Well, nobody can tell a prosecutor that they have to prosecute something. They can have a check and balance on what I cannot prosecute, but they can't tell me that I have to prosecute. Sometimes they get frustrated at that, but the prosecutor is a very powerful position.
And their word power is dynamic, right? And I think depending who's using that word power, it can be scary to some people, right? Or you can use your power for good. So I want to pose this question to you. How have you used your power in the last 8 years to create a safer, just, and equitable criminal legal system here for Nashville?
Right. So first of all, we've got to look at the philosophy behind criminal law, right? Okay. No extra charge, criminal law 101.
Okay. I appreciate it.
There are 4 reasons for criminal law. Number 1, that's in every state, is retribution, right? You did something wrong, you need to be punished for it. Just deserts, revenge, right? Well, any system that's built for revenge, where the state is, that's I don't resonate with that theory behind criminal law, and we don't do that in our office. Okay. But then there are some very real considerations. Number 1, deterrence. We don't want you to continue to do that behavior, and we don't want someone else to do that behavior. And so if they know that we're enforcing the law, maybe that behavior will be minimized. Number 2, rehabilitation, right? Do you need some supports in order to make sure that you do not continue to reoffend? And number 3 is incapacitation, right? Someone has to be locked up, right, because otherwise they're going to continue to hurt other people. So, those are the 3 reasons behind it. So there are people who, unfortunately, we just have to incarcerate. Murder, right? Rape, armed robbery. There are some people who are dangerous, home invasion, burglaries. There are some people who are so dangerous that we have to use the severe sanction of incarceration. But there are so many other places where we can do either a support, so there was rehabilitation, right? Maybe there's another way to deter the behavior other than an incarceration. And there's a lot of cases that we just flat out don't need to be prosecuting, right? Let's take, for example, marijuana, right? Our marijuana laws are a situation where we take a health issue and we put it in the lap of the criminal justice system. Right? Our marijuana laws do very little, if any, to promote public health, and they do nothing to promote public safety. And yet, as a state, we have been prosecuting, charging, incarcerating, putting on probation thousands of people every year for possession of a joint of marijuana. Now, if you get a charge for marijuana and you go to jail, that's a disaster. But even the charge of marijuana, then all of a sudden you've got a narcotics record, and it can impact you with whether or not you can get a job, whether you might be able to get a promotion within your job. It can affect your housing. So, that's a situation where when I took office, there were over 5,000 inmate days in jail just for marijuana. There were hundreds of people charged with just simple possession of marijuana every single year. And we got that down to close to zero on the incarceration. And then 2 years ago, I just said, I was the first prosecutor in the state of Tennessee to say, we are no longer even going to charge people with possession of marijuana under half an ounce. So that was a significant exercise of prosecutorial discretion to make sure that the system is fair. Not only that, there were also huge disparities with regards to demographics. Black folks were getting prosecuted way more often than white folks, even though marijuana usage in both populations is roughly the same.
Right.
So there's another issue, driving on a revoked license, right?
Right.
If you go out and you're driving and you get a speeding ticket, right, and then maybe don't pay the speeding ticket, all of a sudden it bumps up to like a $500 to $600 fine. If you're working and trying to keep a roof over your head and try to take care of your kids, maybe you don't have $500 this month to be able to pay that. Well, then your license gets revoked. You then have to pay a reinstatement fee on top of that, and then you get charged with driving on a revoked license. And we were incarcerating people to the tune of 18,000 inmate days in jail every year.
Wow.
For just driving on a revoked license. So the first thing, I would have clients when I was a defense attorney, and the prosecutor might say, well, they didn't learn their lesson last time, so this time instead of 2 days in jail, it's going to be 15 days in jail.
Right.
Or they didn't learn it the last 2 times, it's going to be 30 days, 90 days, 180 days.
Right.
For just driving on a revoked license.
Right.
Well, I want folks to have their driver's license, and I don't want them in jail. And so we started, first thing we did was we cut the jail time way down, and then we took it to close to zero. And then we started a program with Sheriff Hall called Steering Clear, where now if you get a revoked driver's license ticket, we intercept that ticket before you get booked and processed. And the prosecutor looks at it. If you are on probation for DUI, then we're going to still prosecute it. Right? It's part of the punishment for DUI is you can't drive for that year. But any other case, right, we intercept it, dismiss it. You don't even get booked and processed. They don't even take your fingerprints or a mugshot, right? So you do not have the collateral consequences.
Right.
But then even better, we work with the sheriff's department to help folks get their license reinstated. We can waive certain court fines and fees, right? We can cut back that speeding ticket back to its original amount. We can work with somebody to maybe even get that waived with some public service work. We've been able to convert at least 25% of those cases to people actually having their driver's license reissued to them within 60 days of the time that they show up in court.
Wow, 25%.
And so that's confirmed. So I'm going to bet it's closer to 50%, but that's dramatic, and that's a game changer for a lot of folks. If you get your license, you can go to work, right? You don't have to look over your shoulder when you're taking your kids to school or to the doctor. You feel like you're part of society, like you have an ownership interest in society, which I want you to have. If a police officer pulls you over, you can hand them your driver's license, so the officer knows who they have pulled over, and so they don't have to worry about, do I need to call for backup? No, it's Glenn Funk. He's got his driver's license. He doesn't have a record. I'm not going to have to call a bunch of backup. It keeps officers safe, and it keeps the motorists safe too, because now everybody knows who each other are. Right. So. For all those reasons, I want folks to have a driver's license. I want you to be able, if you've got a driver's license, to get insurance. But it's ridiculous to fill up our jail with folks that have committed a crime of poverty.
Well, and this kind of leads me into like justice, right? I've heard kind of 3 phrases being thrown around. The one that I typically use is the criminal legal system. I heard the criminal justice system, which is probably more commonly used, and then the criminal punishment system, right? and you hear that punishment system specifically in communities of color, black folks, because of because of the disparities, the historical systemic structural discrimination and racism around some of our criminal legal laws that have existed here in the United States. And as DA, I think it's very important that you understand that, the office understands that, and figure out a way to combat that through policy. And so I want to pose that question. Do you recognize that, and how have you tried to combat those things during your term, and can you want to continue to combat those things in possibly the next 8 years that you're DA?
Right. Well, first of all, I completely understand that there have been parts of our community that have been over-policed, over-prosecuted, over-incarcerated. I dealt with it for 25 years as a criminal defense attorney, right? I've sat in rooms where my client was stuck in jail, unable to make a bond, and looked at me and said, Glenn, you got to get me out in the next 48 hours or else I'm going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, my wife and kids are going to have to move in with her mom and live in their basement, right? I get that because I've sat there with folks over and over, hundreds of clients every single year for 25 years, right? And I've also sat with them while they awaited a verdict, knowing that if it went the wrong way, they would have to walk out of the courtroom the wrong door and into custody. But if the jury trial came out the right way for my client, then we'd be walking out in the hallway and hugging and celebrating. So, I mean, I get that. So first things first, to try to make sure that that people can perceive this as a just system, is we have to make sure that the district attorney's office reflects our community. When I took office in 2014, of the 70 assistant district attorneys, 2 were black, none were Hispanic, 68 were white. One of the assistant DAs, Chris Buford, said that, look, when I walk through the courthouse, because I'm black, everybody assumes I'm a public defender, right? Well, it shouldn't be like that. So I've been aggressively recruiting minority members to my office that are great lawyers. I mean, of the 70 lawyers that work in my office, I think it's the best law firm in the entire city. Right? But it's also great because it's diverse, right? And so we are now 28% minority. Not quite to reflect in the community, but getting pretty darn close. And I'll bet our percentage minority is the highest of any big firm in the city. Not only that, I've been able to achieve that while some people have stayed a few years and then left. Look, being an assistant district attorney is a great job. You get great experience. It's great on a resume. You learn how to try a case. You learn how to evaluate a case, and you learn how to prepare witnesses. It's a great job. And so people oftentimes come and recruit out of my office. I had a member of my office, Derry Harper, who got hired to be the Inspector General of the city of New Orleans, right? Well, obviously, he took that job. I mean, he was doing a great job for me, but I understood it, and I had to say, yeah, Derry, go for that. I had another woman, Artie Griffin, who had a best friend who got elected to the Pennsylvania Senate, and she moved up to Pennsylvania to work as a lawyer for the Pennsylvania Senate. I had a woman, Sasha Beatty, who got a job working for the American Prosecutors Association in the District of Columbia. Right. Marcus Floyd was an assistant DA, and Mayor Briley hired him out of my office and paid him twice what I could pay him under state law. So great. And now Marcus is about to be a judge. So great. Anna Escobar was a team leader in domestic violence, and she's now a judge. So a lot of folks have used this platform to go on to even greater things. But despite that, I've continued to be able to intentionally recruit and keep getting our percentages up higher and higher. Maybe even more important than that, it's not just enough, right, that I hire folks to reflect the community. And it's not just enough that I empower them to have real discretion on their cases. They don't have to ask me if they want to dismiss a case. They don't have to ask me if they want to settle a case or plea bargain a case. I empower every one of the 70 assistant district attorneys to handle their case the way they see fit. But even more important than that, leadership, right? Because it's not enough just to have folks in the office that are working as line prosecutors. We need to make sure that we have the experiences, the life experiences, the perspectives of folks from across the community when we're talking policy. We now have 1/3 of our leadership in the office is minority. 25% is LGBT. And that diversity of life experience really makes a difference when we are talking about major issues. For example, when I took office, we were over prosecuting narcotics cases.
Okay.
The prior police chief, his direction to his officers was any amount of drugs, charge it as possession for resale, and always charge it as drug-free school zone. Well, my first day in office, we quit prosecuting drug-free school zone unless a school child had actually been endangered.
Right.
But we sat down as a group 2 years into it, and I did the statistical dive. We had been prosecuting and convicting 1,138 and 1,139 different individuals for felony narcotics. When I was a criminal defense attorney, I had an ounce, or not an ounce, maybe I had a few grams of cocaine in my console, but it was for my own personal use. Well, you're charged possession for resale in a school zone. But it should just be a misdemeanor, Glenn. You're right, it should be a misdemeanor. But what they've charged you with is possession for resale in a school zone. If we lose this trial, you're going to get 20 years. Well, what can you do for me? Well, I'm going to do all I can. If they offered, 8 years of probation, a client would probably jump on that rather than risk 20 years in prison.
Right.
But then he's a convicted felon for the rest of his life,
Right.
and he's handicapped forever. So we knew that was a problem. And so we gathered a group of folks from diverse backgrounds, and my question to them was, at what point do we actually believe, just based on quantity alone, that the person is selling drugs?
Right.
Not if they sold to an undercover officer or to an informant, but just on the quantity, because that was the majority of what the cases were that were brought to us. And we had that discussion, and we ended up doing a whole lot more reductions to simple possession and sometimes even dismissals. And so we've gone from 1,138 down to less than 400 every year. That's 750 people a year that are not getting felony convictions when we didn't even really believe that they were guilty of that felony in the first place.
Right.
By contrast, during that same period of time when Nashville was at over 1,100, Memphis was at under 600. So clearly there was something wrong here. And having that diversity of background experience, my background as a defense attorney, some of the other folks around the table, backgrounds as defense attorneys, but also backgrounds from living and growing up in different parts of town.
Right.
We were able to make some real policy changes that make a real difference, not just in the lives of those 750 people, but really in the entire community.
So what are your thoughts when you hear, because we've had people come on this show and call you out and say, hey, District Attorney Glenn Funk likes prosecuting black men, over policing, over judging, ruling, and really attacking black men and black youth in this city. So when you hear that, how does that make you feel?
Well, I don't think it's true, right? And I think, that there is a narrative of who prosecutors are and what they do that is true in many, many jurisdictions, right? And if you watch the national news, you see that. Right. But it's not just, I'm not the only person in America that sees the justice system the way I see it, as far as trying to make sure that we reach out and provide counseling programs, dismissals to vast numbers of the cases that are charged. We hosted a conference last summer where it was 40 of the 50 biggest cities in the nation, and there were people from all over. The prosecutor from Detroit, from Chicago, from just outside Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, from Atlanta, Jacksonville, all across the country, Oakland, and what we do when we get together is we study the best practices of the host city, because we all come from similar electorates, which means that we all are we're all progressive, right? We all are trying to attack these issues in a way that can keep our community safe while bringing the community together at the same time. But we all sometimes face criticism that might be uninformed, because we're actually working to try to find ways to not prosecute folks.
Right.
Look, community safety demands that we prosecute folks that commit violent crime, right? Just have to. But are there times when we can give second chances, and are there whole systems that need to be deconstructed, which we've been working on for the last 8 years. We've taken the jail population, right? The local jail population, the number of people every night that are in Darren Hall's jail here in Nashville. In 2013, that was 3,100 people every night, right? Every year I've been DA, that has been reduced by at least 5% every year, and some years 10 to 15%.
Right.
And in 2021, that number was 1,510. That's over a 50% reduction in the number of people that we have jailed. Right, that's significant. That's 1,500. That's 1,600 more people that are home tonight with their families, and tomorrow they're going to get up and go to work, and that's great. They're also, better able to go forward, not just while their case is pending, but they're able to go forward long term with living their lives and being productive and taking care of their families. So that's significant. We've talked already about driver's license cases and marijuana. We've been working to decriminalize mental health, and glad to talk about that to a greater extent. But we've also worked on bail reform, and I think that's made a big difference.
Because I want to pivot and go like kind of specifically to jail and prisons and everything around that. And one of those things is cash bail, money bail.
Okay.
Some people feel like it shouldn't be any dollar amount put on a human body, or shouldn't be jailed for the simple fact that I'm poor, and don't have the resources to pay the fine, to pay the money bill. What are your thoughts on that, and what does cash bail reform look like with you being DA for the next 8 years?
Right. So that's something we started working on the first day I was in office. I worked with Public Defender Don Diener. I worked with the judges, worked with the mayor's office, worked with the sheriff's department on that. Someone should not be held in custody, right, just because they can't make bail if they're not a threat while they're out on the streets. And especially they should never be held in custody if at the end of the case we're going to be either dismissing the case or agreeing to a probation or just a fine. Mm-hmm. So under the federal Constitution, United States Constitution, you do not have a constitutional right to a bail. Right? The purposes of bail are make sure you show up for court, and make sure you're not going to be a continued threat to public safety. And under the federal Constitution, if you're not a threat to public safety, then you get a bail and it doesn't have to be a cash bail. That's the way it works. But under the state of Tennessee, in 1871, when our Constitution was written, they put into the Constitution that every citizen has a right to bail unless it's a capital offense. Now, in 1871, what were the capital offenses? Well, there were a lot of them, right? A capital offense means you could get the death penalty, right? Murder, stealing a horse, rape, a number of other cases. Most of the serious felonies you could get the death penalty for. Right. Well, now you can only get the death penalty for first-degree murder. So now everything, according to our Tennessee Constitution, is eligible for a bail. How do you do a proper balance there? Because that's not fair. Right? Well, one of the things that we worked really hard to do is make sure that we are not putting people in jail pre-trial for any misdemeanor. Right? And so now the Sheriff's Department has a program called the Pretrial Release Program, where the sheriff actually acts as a bail bondsman. Okay. And he lets people get out, and then they notify the person of their new court date as they get closer to their court date. Sends a text message a couple days ahead of time, okay, which works really well. That program has been around since the early 2000s, but the program had started out, and within the first few years, it had grown to like 7,000 individuals every year were getting out pursuant to the sheriff's program. That had slowly gone down to only about 3,000 people a year. And plus, they were charging folks $35 to participate. When we started on bail reform, one of the first asks we made is to Sheriff Hall, and we said, can you get rid of the $35 to where it's not a burden to anybody to get out of jail?
Right.
And he agreed to do that, and so great. And then we've been ramping that up, and so we now have an agreement that the judges follow and the magistrates follow, where every single person that's charged with a misdemeanor is presumed that they can get out of jail without having to post any bond. It takes about 2 hours to get processed in, processed back out, give the Sheriff's Department your phone number and your contact information, and you're told when your next court date is. Right. At this point, there are only about three excluding factors that could keep a misdemeanor in jail. Number one, domestic violence. Okay. Right? But even then, you can still have a hearing in front of a judge where you can argue for pretrial release within 24 to 48 hours. Second thing, DUI, third offense. If you have such an alcohol problem that you have been caught driving drunk 3 times, then yeah, you're going to have to stay in jail until a judge actually reviews your bond in 24 to 48 hours. And the third is someone who has been arrested twice in a week or 3 times within the last 3 months. Because then, you know, if it keeps being a revolving door, then you don't ever get to court on any of your charges. And so we need to, and we still hear them within 1 to 2 days on bond. We can give them a trial within 5 days. Nobody gets held longer than 14 days on a misdemeanor before they've actually had a trial, and we're always ready to go forward within 5 days.
If me and you committed a crime, let's say we got a little bit of trouble, and we have the same offense, same criminal background, and a magistrate says, okay, Glenn, your bond's gonna be $30,000, and mine is gonna be $50,000, right? Can you help us make it make sense on that bail discrepancy in money, and how do magistrates or even possibly judges come up with the amount? Because it seems like it's unclear on how a dollar amount is arrived at in our system.
Right. Our judges appoint a number of magistrates to work in the night court. Right. And when someone is brought in, then the magistrate looks at some statutory factors: length of time in the community, criminal history, seriousness of the offense, strength of the offense, in determining a proper bail amount. There should not be large discrepancies, though there are sometimes discrepancies. But there is a little bit of discretion on bail set by the commissioners. What we have put together in our bail reform is that everybody gets to have a constitutional bail hearing within 48 hours, which means you get a lawyer. Right? If you think yours was too high or you can't make it, you get a lawyer. You can bring in witnesses. You can have a full hearing in front of a judge within 48 hours. So, for it to be a $50,000 bond or a $30,000 bond, that's going to be a serious felony to get that high of a bond anyway. Right. And if it was a misdemeanor, we'd both be out of jail right away anyway, right? Without either one of us having to pay. There have been some fairly high-profile cases where different magistrates set vastly different bond. When Emmanuel Sampson, a black man, did a mass shooting at the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ, the commissioner looked at that and says, mass shooting, I'm not going to set a bond. Right. We'll let a judge review that in a few days, right? A year later, when Travis Reinking goes in and shoots up the Waffle House and kills 4 people and injures more and was wanting to kill even more. For some reason, that commissioner set him a bond. It was a couple $1 million, right? But set a bond.
Right.
As soon as word got out that a bond had been set, that next morning, Judge Mike Mondelli, who's retiring now, but's been a great judge for a number of years, Mike Mondelli scratched that out and said, "There's no bond on this case."
Right.
And so that was, in some ways, one of the most egregious discrepancies between the way a white man was handled and a black man that was handled, though neither one of them got out of jail, right? And neither one of them made the bail. And mass shooting being as dangerous it is, they were both convicted and they were both given the same sentence, which was life without parole.
Policing has been a hot topic for the last couple of years, right? And you hear a lot of words like reimagining police, abolish police, and probably the most common one is defund police. And I want to ask you specifically, what are your thoughts on defund the police, and what does that even mean to you? Because people have different definitions and terminology on what defund police means to them. And what does that mean to you, and what does that even possibly look like in Nashville, if that's something that you advocate for, or what? I don't even know if you spoke on this before.
Right. I want to fully fund public safety.
Okay.
Right. That means the mental health crisis interventions we need to make sure are fully funded and can be in every precinct, not just the 2 that we currently have. And I think that's being expanded by Chief Drake as quickly as he can. We need to make sure that we have supports like fund the Sheriff's Department, the DA's office steering clear, fund the Behavioral Care Center, which the Sheriff has had open for 15 months, and it's a partnership between the District Attorney's Office, the Sheriff's Department, and the Public Defender's Office. We need to fully fund outreach like Judge Bell's CARES Court, community court out at the former Magruder School, right? That takes away the stigma of even having to go to court and works to end up having felonies reduced to misdemeanors, where it won't be that terrible burden on folks going forward. And we staffed that court with an assistant district attorney. We've got a veterans court run by Judge Melissa Blackburn to support folks with mental health issues that are our veterans and have some unique issues that they're having to deal with for the rest of their lives.
Right.
We've got a recovery court run by Judge Gail Robinson. We've got a DC-4 run by Judge Jennifer Smith, and we've got a woman's DC-4 run by Angie Dalton, all of which are trying to take addiction issues and say these don't need to be incarceration issues, they need to be treatment and support issues.
Right.
So we really need to be funding. We need to fund things like the efforts that we've done with Judge Sheila Calloway, right? Which includes restorative justice in the juvenile court, which is a program that she and I started. We worked with then Public Defender Dawn Diener. We worked with then Captain Howie, the Youth Services Director in the Police Department, where we are now have a program that combines the services of the Tennessee Voices for Victims Victim Advocacy Group, along with Travis Claybrooks, who runs the Refi Institute, and we are pulling cases out of the criminal justice system, out of the juvenile criminal justice system, and giving them instead to a restorative justice program, where through 3.5 years now we're only running at a 4% recidivism rate for juveniles who have caused harm by stealing cars, breaking into cars, breaking into homes, and even committing robberies.
Well, let me stop you there, Glenn, because the narrative would be, from folks that have been on this platform, there is no restorative justice happening in this current administration.
Completely false, 100% false. And some of those folks have even talked to Judge Calloway and met with Travis Claybrooks at the Refi Institute. So I don't know how they could say that with a straight face. That's a program that took 2 years to put in place. It required trips to other cities to see their restorative justice programs, specifically San Francisco and Oakland. It's taken a lot of work, and we've had at this point through 3.5 years, we have a 100% victim satisfaction rate, and just that 4% recidivism rate, which is why we have expanded it and we continue to expand it in the juvenile system. And I've been meeting with a number of stakeholders to try to bring that restorative justice to the adult system. We were actually, I thought we had some momentum to get that going before COVID hit. And I've had meetings as recently as 45 days ago with Martisa Johnson and a community-based organization about potentially having a restorative justice modeled after what we've already seen successful in the juvenile court. Bring that to the adult court. You know, we've talked to Rashida Fatuga at Gideon's Army, and we've also talked to Travis Claybrooks. I think there's room for both of those folks potentially participating in the adult system. You know, anytime you do something as different as restorative justice, you need to start it out as a pilot program. We started that out as a pilot program in the juvenile court. We've been able to take it out of its pilot phase and have it fully operational in the juvenile court now. It's time for us to go ahead and have it in a pilot phase in the adult court. Judge Linda Jones and Judge Melissa Blackburn have both, and actually Judge Gail Robinson, have all three indicated that they would be willing to potentially host that restorative justice where the judge has to kind of make sure that the case doesn't just go away. You have to have a report back by the community-based organization that the case was successful and the charge could be just flat out dismissed. But there has to be a judge that oversees that. But the idea is to not have the person even come into court and appearing in front of the judge.
And just for the listeners and watchers who might not understand what restorative justice is, what is restorative justice?
Right. Yeah, people use that term, and I think they don't even know for sure what it means. Restorative justice is a practice. It came out of New Zealand. And when folks from Oakland came to talk to Nashville stakeholders, and they were telling me, well, it came out of New Zealand, I raised my hand and I said, yeah, but they don't have as many guns as we have in Tennessee. And the response was, yeah, but they have even more violent crime than we see anywhere in America because they have edge weapons, knives, machetes, and okay. But what restorative justice is in an appropriate case, the case doesn't even go to court the first time. Okay. Doesn't even go to court the first time. And what happens is the person who was harmed has to agree to this alternative process where the person who caused the harm is not going to go to court. The person who caused the harm then has to meet and has to repair the harm to the person who was harmed. How was the person hurt? Right? How were you harmed? What do you need? They then have to have a program to make that person as whole as possible. Do they need restitution? Do they need information? An understanding of how this person picked them to victimize? Because they need to be safe and secure, and they need to be whole going forward. Right. That the person who caused the harm then has to work to make not only the victim whole, but the community whole, their own family whole, and themselves whole. And so the way it works is we see an offense before the person even goes to court. We review it. If this is something that we think could be at least eligible for being taken all the way out of the court system, we talk to Tennessee Voices for Victims. They go and they meet with the victim, and they explain. If it goes down the restorative justice path, this is what the next 6 months to a year are going to look like. If it goes through the court system path, this is what it's going to look like. Assuming that they approve, which very high conversion rate on that, then the public defender will speak to the person who caused harm, right? And say, this is what this would look like if you go to court. This is what you would look like if you go through the restorative justice program. And then they work on, assuming everybody's on board, then they work to come up with a program to address those 4 things that the person who caused harm has to do. Restitution is much higher in restorative justice than in just going to court and getting put on probation. Real healing is much more likely in a restorative justice program, because ultimately at the end of the program, there is a meeting between the person who was harmed and the person who caused harm.
Right.
And the person who was harmed gets to ask the questions, why'd you pick my house? Right? Did you know that I was going to be home with my kids at the time you broke in? Who else were you with? How long did you look at the other houses in the neighborhood? Why did you pick my house of all houses? So that they can have those needs addressed to find out if they're safe in that home that they are living in. It might be, hey, when you took my car, did you not realize that, yeah, you might have fun in it for a couple hours, but once you wrecked it, what it meant was I wasn't going to get to work the next day, and I was going to lose my job, and that was going to hurt my kids and the rest of my family. And that understanding develops an empathy on part of the person who caused harm that maybe they hadn't gotten yet in life. It allows them to repair the harm that they caused in a way that gets them more connected with their own community. So instead of being divided from the community by a prosecution and seeing themselves when they look in the mirror as a defendant, instead they see themselves as more part of the community, which is why, the numbers in Oakland, they've been doing this a lot longer than us, and they've been able to do over 1,000 a year, but they're running at a 12% recidivism rate.
Right.
But if we can keep this up with the great work that the Refi Institute is doing, if we can keep ours in that 4% range, that would just be amazing.
Right.
Because that means 96% of the youth that go through this program are not going to be derailed on their efforts to continue to grow, to get their high school diploma, to get out and get a job, to work, to have families. So really excited about the restorative justice program and the work. And if anyone should doubt that we have put this type of effort, Travis Claybooks, the Rafah Institute, RAPHAH, or call Judge Calloway, because she is rightfully proud of this program. I'm rightfully proud of this program. We've done a lot of work, and we're doing a lot of good.
Another thing around policing that we seem to be seeing, I don't know if it's news, media, propaganda, is just the use of the use of fatal force incidents, in community. We just had one on I-65, which was a mental health crisis, but a high-profile one, that you were just a part of, the Danial Hambrick case. Many folks, specifically I would say in the black community here, felt that was mishandled. Can you share your thoughts on that process with that case, and maybe give us some insight that you haven't voiced in community, hasn't heard quite from you in detail?
Okay. Danial Hambrick was shot and killed by a police officer named Andrew Delkey. When it first happened, right, I called in the TBI to do the investigation. But even while the TBI was taking control of the scene, the Metro Nashville Police Department was taking a picture of a gun and tweeting that out, that here's a picture of the gun, describing Danial Hambrick as the gunman. And when we got the video from MDHA that night, we could see this chase. It was a traffic stop. The worst thing that could happen is a traffic stop that escalates into a shooting. It was a traffic stop that Danial Hambrick had run from the police, and that he had a gun in his hand as he was running. The MDHA video, as he continues to run, he runs past a tree. This is late July, had leaves on it. And so the last 7 or 8 seconds of Danial Hambrick's life, you could not see, right? In the shooting, you could not see. And so you start to get the reports of what the police officer was saying. The police officer was saying that he was threatened by Danial Hambrick, and so he had to do this shooting. And so when I met with the TBI, I said, see if there's any other cameras, and then get me that. And sure enough, they found one on a high school that was a block away, and not as high quality of an image as MDHA, but you could see what happened because it was a different angle. And so on that Sunday following the Thursday night shooting, I got to see that video for the first time. And I thought the video was clear, right? I mean, yeah, it was a little bit grainy, right? Yeah, it was like 3 frames per second. But clearly Danial Hambrick was just running. He was running away. Was he obeying the police commands to stop, drop the gun? No, but he was just running. And the officer stopped and shot him in the back. Okay. I saw that, and it was clear to me that it looked to me like either a first-degree murder or a second-degree murder. That wanted to make sure we got all the investigation done by the TBI. But I thought it was clear that a crime had been committed. But I also knew that when we attempted to charge the officer, that there were going to be some problems with that case, right? No question Danial Hambrick had a gun. No question the officer was yelling at him to stop and to drop the gun. I also knew that there had never been a case in Nashville where an officer was charged with first or second degree murder, right? And that there hadn't been many cases around the country where an officer had been even charged, and even fewer where the officer was convicted. But I thought that when I see a crime, right, I tell every assistant in my office, you have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime was committed, or else you cannot go forward. Mm-hmm. And you have to believe that a rational jury can convict based upon these facts. And I said, look, we might be the underdogs on this, but we'll be right going forward. And so I said, well, you know what? We're going to charge him, and we're going to charge him by a warrant. I had seen too many cases where people had just given a case to a grand jury, and the grand jury had failed to indict Breonna Taylor. That prosecutor didn't even give him the opportunity to charge with a murder. Michael Brown in St. Louis, right? Now the district attorney comes out, well, this and this and this, and so the grand jury didn't indict, but nobody was present for that. So I said, let's do it by warrant, where everything is transparent. And so we had a first application to a magistrate. The magistrate refused to give a warrant. And so we had to go to a general sessions judge and got a general sessions judge to sign the warrant. And then we had a preliminary hearing, and Judge Melissa Blackburn bound the case over to the grand jury. And then we presented it to the grand jury, and were able to successfully get an indictment in the case. But all along, his attorneys had said, we're not pleading anything, right? Nobody's ever been convicted when the person had a gun in their hand, and they were right. And in Tennessee, the rules are that if the allegation is by the officer self-defense, number one, you get a kind of a super self-defense charge, even stronger than a stand your ground, the stand your ground law that got Trayvon Martin's killer off in Florida. It's a super self-defense for police officers. Also under Tennessee law, even if the officer doesn't know who they're chasing, then the criminal record of the person they shot can come into evidence. And I don't want to talk too much about that, but knowing that we were going to have a jury that was going to be probably 10 white, 2 black, maybe 9 white, 2 black, 9 white, 3 black. I mean, I know kind of some attitudes that folks might bring into that jury box, some implicit biases maybe. And so I knew we were the underdogs as we were going forward. But I also knew that I thought that we were right, and by golly, we were gonna fully intended to try that case. I was not going to dismiss that case. But also knew that however the case worked out, it was going to be triggering for a lot of folks. Right? There were a lot of folks who said that I was wrong to ever charge a police officer. But if it's an unjustified killing, an officer needs to know that they can be charged. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of folks that were very upset about that. On the other hand, folks, especially in the black community, I knew that there was a chance that what was going to happen whenever this case resolved, whether it was a conviction, whether it was a hung jury, which meant no sanction against the officer or whether it was an acquittal, that was going to be a triggering moment for folks with all of their emotions, because folks do have legitimate concerns about what's going to happen to their kids if they ever get pulled over by a police officer, and it's different in the white community and the black community. It just is.
Right.
When I turned 16, my parents talked to me and says, if you ever get pulled over, yes sir and no sir to the officer, and do whatever they tell you to do. Right? I was at a function at Pearl Cone, and we were having different groups, 10, 15 tables of 10 people, and we were talking about different topics. And one of the topics, and I was at a table with a number of folks, in the topics of what do you say to your 16-year-old? And I can remember a pastor that was at the table, African-American pastor, who said, when my son turned 16, I did not know if I should give him the talk.
Right.
And ultimately, I decided I had to, because I had to make sure that he was as protected as possible. And the talk, as he described it, was keep your hands on the steering wheel at all times. Right? Whenever the police officer gives you an instruction, move very slowly. Mm-hmm. Right? Make sure that they know before you move exactly how you were going to move, because I don't want you to be shot, son. Right? And he was breaking down in tears in front of strangers as he shared this. We have implicit bias training every year in my office. And there was a woman in my office who shared a conversation about the talk when her son had turned 16. And she described it as, when my son turned 16, all his life he'd been a happy-go-lucky kid. He loved everybody and everybody loved him. But I had to give him the talk the day he got his driver's license. Right. She said, and I could see a little bit of the light go out in his eyes. Right? There should not be two different kinds of talks that are given, right? We've got to get to a place where folks aren't afraid, where no one in our community is afraid of the police. But when you see these incidents happen over and over and over again, of course, folks have, black folks in Nashville give that talk. And here's a situation where for the second time in the last 8 years, it was a traffic stop that escalated to somebody being shot and killed. All right, so we're getting ready for trial. We're a week away from starting to pick the jury in the trial. Right? And ultimately, anytime that you get close to a trial, there's at least a little bit of discussion. I thought the chances of them pleading guilty were close to zero as far as pleading guilty to anything. Right? Ultimately, about a week before the trial, a few days before the trial was supposed to start, we reached an agreement that was as follows. He would actually plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter, right, which is a knowing killing under a heat of passion. Right? He would give up on his self-defense claims and any claims of it being a justified shooting. He would become a convicted felon. He would never be able to be a police officer again. He would never again be able to have a gun and a badge on the street. He'd never be able to have a gun again. He would admit that what he did was wrong and that he was not justified, and he would go to jail for a 3-year sentence, which, if he gets all of his behavioral credits, he may be able to get done as quickly as 18 months. It'll probably be somewhere between 18 and 21 months that he'll actually do in jail. When I made that deal, I knew that Danial Hambrick's life was worth way more than 3 years.
Okay.
Right? If I was a juror, I would have convicted of first-degree murder. But I wasn't going to be the jury. I was just going to be the lawyer in front of the jury, and I had to get all 12 people to agree unanimously that he was guilty of second-degree murder or first-degree murder in order to achieve that conviction. When I took office in 2014, the police department investigated itself on any officer-involved shooting. So, of course, there were never any officer-involved shootings that turned into a prosecution.
Right.
I said, we're going to bring in the TBI every time. I said to the chief, you have to sign this MOU, which he did not want to do, right?
Right.
But ultimately he did, and so officer-involved shootings, chief signed it.
Chief Anderson, right?
Chief Anderson,
Okay.
the TBI and the DA's office. So shooting happens, as soon as the scene is secure, they let me know. I call in the TBI, MNPD just secures the perimeter, and the TBI does all the investigation. But that wasn't enough. I've worked with 4 mayors to get body cams on every police officer, so we know it's not just what the police officer's report says happened,
Right.
because that might not be exactly what happened, right? So we can see the body cam. We know, right, exactly what the officer was seeing at the time the officer decided to discharge his or her weapon.
Right.
But an independent investigation and a body cam don't change police behavior unless the criminal justice system has demonstrated that the officer in an unjustified shooting can be charged, convicted, and incarcerated, right? I could not, and the odds were that was either going to be a not guilty or a hung jury where the officer's not accountable, right? Well, yeah, we could have tried it again, but we'd have still had 12-person jury that had to find unanimously.
Right.
I knew that this was a situation where no other jurisdiction in the whole country has ever convicted somebody when the person who was shot had a gun in their hand. Mm-hmm. And I knew it was the first time that Nashville had ever convicted an officer on something that would put him in jail, right? So, I made this decision. Yeah, it had some people very angry. It had some people very hurt. It had some people who thought, well, gee, Glenn, we put our trust in you, and you had our back. You were going forward against this police officer. But at the end of the day, what I want is I want no more mothers to have to grieve for a child who was shot by a police officer after a traffic stop. And so you have to have that deterrence to make sure that we change the police training, we change the police behavior. No police officer wants to be in jail for even 3 minutes. And we have to change the attitude from, well, I shoot because I can, to I'm only going to shoot if I absolutely have to.
Speaking of mothers, what was Mrs. Hambrick's reaction, or what was that conversation like when you told her, like, hey, this is a decision that we're going to go forth with?
Right. I'd been meeting with Ms. Hambrick for 3 years, right? Many, many times, right? I knew that she wanted Andrew Delkey to be in prison for the rest of his life. I knew that. And I knew that she had gone through a civil process where she was suing. And in a civil lawsuit where you're arguing about money, then she has to give permission before the thing gets settled because it's her money, right? In a criminal case, I represent the people of the state of Tennessee. I represent the people of Nashville. I try to do what's in the best interest of the people of Nashville. And we make sure that victims have input and we know kind of what they want, what their expectations are, but they don't necessarily get veto power over a decision. Mm-hmm. Right? When I met with Ms. Hambrick, she was upset. By the time that we actually had the plea the next day, she was very upset in the courtroom. Now, she did call me Glenn when she was yelling. Now, she was very angry, right? But she called me Glenn, which demonstrated in my mind that, this is not something where she hadn't seen me for 3 years and all of a sudden I'm doing this without having taken her concerns into account. And my heart goes out to her. She lost her only son, right? She's a grieving mother. This is, and her son's life is worth more than 3 years, right? I mean, and if I could be judge, jury, TDOC all in one person, yeah, for sure, this would have had a different result. But in this case, with those facts, likelihood of a hung jury, percentage chance of an acquittal, the facts of this case that were not nearly as egregious as some of the cases where folks have had the case dismissed. This was, in my mind, the best outcome in order to make sure that we had the best chance going forward that no one else was going to be the victim of an unjustified shooting after a traffic stop.
Do you feel like you lost a little bit of trust from the black community here in Nashville because of that decision?
People have known me for a long time, right? Lady stopped me when I was coming out of Kinko's the other day, right? People stopped me on the street. People have known me because I worked nonstop for folks when I was a criminal defense attorney, and no one did a single day in jail that couldn't have been avoided because they knew that I not only knew the law, but I worked as hard as it took to try to help folks have as good a resolution on their cases as possible, maybe get them all the way out of trouble. So, those roots are deep. But I also fully understand that even people who know me, who trust my heart, were angry, were disappointed. Progress is sometimes painful because progress doesn't get to the destination oftentimes in one step. Sometimes we got to take a number of different steps. Some people in the community probably do trust me less. Right? But what I'm hopeful is that we continue to make progress toward having a society that treats black folks and white folks the same, to where our criminal justice system is a justice system, not a criminal justice system, not an incarceration system. It really is a justice system. I believe that the justice system doesn't have to divide a community. I think it can bring a community together, but it has to demonstrate good faith every day. That's what I'm working toward, and this is a step along the way. And if we continue to make progress, then maybe 5 or 10 years from now, people might still be mad and think I settled this case wrong, but we'll acknowledge the fact that we have, as a city, continued to make progress.
A current issue that just came up in our council, Metro Council, is license plate readers, right? LPRs. The bill passed, so it's going to go into a 6-month pilot. Many people in our community feel like with enough guardrails with that tool as the bill is written, which I'm pretty sure is going to be, kind of changing here and there to make sure the guardrails are placed. But especially people of color had its concerns systemically about how the LPRs be placed, what data will be collected, and just targeting because of just sort of historical events that have just occurred. Drive While Black report here in our own city and just, nationally here in the United States. What are your thoughts on LPRs?
Okay. LPRs are an important tool. We all have license plates on our cars. We don't try to hide those, and we have to have those on our cars for identification. Right. All of us have telephones in our pocket, which we're transmitting our location all day, every day. License plate readers will oftentimes solve a crime somebody who is either on the run or somebody who we're trying to find to ask questions of. It's across the country, thousands of violent crimes have had folks apprehended because of the license plate readers. Belle Meade already has them installed, and they find stolen cars every week with that. But the folks that are concerned are correct, because historically any advance in technology has been used to continue over-policing, over-prosecution, over-incarceration. And so, some of the concerns from the folks that are against LPRs is, number one, well, they may have heard of a jurisdiction that used license plate readers and then went out and arrested people for driving on a revoked license, right? Or you're saying they're doing this to try to catch the car thieves or the robbers or the murderers, but you're actually railroading a bunch of folks into jail for driving on a revoked license.
Right.
That's not going to happen in Nashville because I don't prosecute folks for driving on a revoked license. It's just not what our LPRs are going to be used for. Secondly, anecdotally, we hear that an LPR may sometimes misread a license plate, and somebody might be driving down the street with their kids in the back, and all of a sudden they're traumatized because they're pulled out. Their police sit them on the side of the road and rummage through their car and do an extensive search. It's humiliating. It's traumatizing. The kids have to go through that. Those are exceedingly rare. Almost never, but it's not never. Right. And so we don't want that. But what's the balance? What's the trade-off? If we catch 1,000 people, but 2 people have to be traumatized, is that balance right? Well, hopefully, as technology continues to improve, we end up with 0 versus that. And so that's why I think it's important that we have a pilot phase to make sure that we are not traumatizing innocent folks. But we had that nurse shooting on Interstate 440 a little over a year ago. If we'd had LPRs on 440, we'd have been able to make that apprehension probably within the next few hours. We were fortunate that good police work ended up solving that case within a matter of 3 or 4 days. But if the people that did that senseless killing had been able to escape because we didn't have the technology that's actually available to us and used in other jurisdictions, well, that would have been a crime. So I like doing anything like this in a pilot phase. I like being able to study the data. But the third reason why folks are against LPRs goes back to your last question, right? Which is, defund the police versus my part of fully fund public safety, right? Well, why are we spending money on LPRs when we've got so many needs in this community? So many supports are needed, whether it's education, whether it's training, whether it's diversion programs out of the courts, right? You're right. We got a lot of needs, and we got a lot of demands on our budget as a city. We've just got to make sure that we've got enough, not just for LPRs, but for supports to try to make sure that needs are addressed.
Yeah, and I think that's because public safety is vast, right? And I think what we've seen here on the surface anyway here in Nashville, whenever something is brought up in public safety, it's always kind of what we see is to go into policing, right? And as the only option for public safety. Which it shouldn't be, right? It's other services that can be funded, whether it's education, whether it's mental health programs, other things. That also is part of public safety in preventing crimes or having wraparound services to prevent people from going back to jail or prison.
Right. So let me tell you, the restorative justice program in juvenile court costs money, and as a city, we've invested there. We've also got another investment that Judge Calloway and I have been working on, along with the Metro Police Department, that is another example of how, as a city, we are in fact spending the resources to try to decriminalize, try to provide supports, and that's the Juvenile Assessment Center, right? Many folks know that we are in the process of, we're going over the next 2 to 3 years to build a new juvenile court facility. And we've bought a certain amount of property. But at the same time that we're doing that to better serve the folks that actually have to go to court, we are also recognizing that not everybody who has a juvenile offense even needs to go to juvenile court. Right? In particular, the status offenses, runaways, for example, or curfew violations. Right? Currently, you cannot be incarcerated if you're a juvenile that is a runaway or has a curfew violation. So what happens is you get picked up, you get taken to juvenile court, you have to meet a probation officer, you have to look at a judge in a robe. They then maybe give you a talking to, and then you're released.
Your parents pick you up.
And what you hear is, well, you know what? I'm a criminal. I had to go to juvie. Right. And they didn't do anything to me, so I'm back home. both of those are bad messages. I don't want people to start seeing themselves as criminals, and the recidivism rate, all of a sudden they might commit more serious offenses. We even had a situation in the last year where a youth in Antioch, who was a junior in high school, who actually was a Division I basketball prospect, shot and killed another junior in high school who was a Division I football prospect. Now 2 lives are ruined. One's dead and the other one's facing these charges.
Right.
The person who did the shooting had been a runaway 6 times. And we never provided any services. And I don't know that this would have solved that or prevented this tragedy from happening, right? But what if instead of being taken to court, right, he had somebody actually try to address their needs? And that's what an assessment center is. Instead of going to juvie, you're taken to a different place. We're going to try to see if in 2022 we can actually get some space built out in the Family Safety Center on Murfreesboro Road, where you're not going to jail, you're not going to a court. And then when the new facility is built off of that campus, we would have a separate assessment center that's not even on the campus of the court. But the idea is you get brought to a safe space. It would be staffed by somebody from the juvenile court, but nobody wearing a robe or a badge or a gun. It's really somebody who is working as a clearinghouse for the nonprofits around town.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well, I see your son has run away from home. What's going on in your house? Why in the world would he decide he needs to run away? Or why did she think that she needed to just leave when you had told her that you wanted her to go to bed? Speak to the youth. Why are you running away? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you staying home and doing your homework and getting up and going to school tomorrow? Why are you out? And try to find that. And so you come in and you talk through that with a representative of the juvenile court, but it's not really marketed as that.
Right.
And then, okay, well, so you live in Bellevue. Well, Nashville's blessed with fantastic nonprofits across our city. Well, we've got a nonprofit that deals with that particular issue in Bellevue, and let's get them to come down here, meet with the family, and set up some other times when y'all can talk, or we can provide supports to your family.
Right.
Oh, you live in Antioch. Well, we've got this other great nonprofit in Antioch, and let's connect you with that.
Right.
Other cities have tried this model and have seen tremendous success, and so I'm hopeful that Nashville is going to be able to have that up and going. I think between my support for this, the judge's support for this, even Chief Drake and the police department's support for this, if we can do that, then we've made a difference. But that's an investment of real dollars.
Right.
The behavioral care center is expensive. Right? And the behavioral care center, what that is, it's a mental health hospital to where people that get arrested, instead of going to jail, can be diverted out of the justice system and into this hospital that is run by the mental health co-op under contract with the sheriff. But every morning at 6:30, an assistant district attorney reviews the cases that were arrested the night before. And if there's a mental health flag, she then has the person reviewed by the mental health co-op, assessed. The public defender meets with the person, decides whether or not they want to either go to the court system or go into this hospital that the sheriff built right next door to the jail.
Right.
If they want to get the mental health treatment, right, which is free to them, they're in there for anywhere from 3 days to 30 days. Average length of stay is 8 days. They get real treatment in a real facility. They get stabilized on their meds. They get out of the facility. Their case is dismissed by my office and expunged by the courts on motion by the public defender. They have 30 days of meds. They have a 30, 60, and 90-day comeback date to check back in with the mental health co-op. That costs money, but as a city, we have invested in that, and so we are fully funding public safety in these concrete ways that's making a real difference. We've now, on the behavioral care center, been open since October of 2020, so we're now 15 months, 16, 17 months into this. Sheriff Hall's running only a 5% recidivism rate for the folks that have graduated his program. 5%.
Wow.
For folks with mental health issues.
Wow.
How about that? And so not only is it better for them,
right,
as individuals, it's making sure that we don't have courts clogged. We don't have future victims.
We're not jailing a mental health crisis.
And we're not just jailing it. The sheriff says that 30% of his jail population is people who have mental health issues that violated their probation.
Wow.
Well, if we can get in front of that, not put people on probation, have their case dismissed after they've gotten real mental health treatment,
Right.
that's huge. That's a program that took us several years to work on, but we were able to get it done, and it's required a major investment by our city, but it's also an investment that will pay off because not incarcerating folks, not having them on dockets, right, not having them recommit offenses, that's making the community safer, but it's also saving money in the long run.
And so, District Attorney Glenn, 8 years, 8 more years, possibly.
Right.
I just round it off and call it a decade. Personally, you know, can really is going to shape what a growing city like Nashville looks like when we're continuously growing. And so, if reelected again, what does 8 more years of District Attorney Glenn Funk look like for Nashville? What can we expect? That can be the same. What can we expect that can be different?
Right. Well, I'm going to continue to drive to make sure that the district attorney office reflects our community, which means we need to get our percentages up a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And leadership continues to reflect our community. I'm going to continue to make sure that no one is in jail just because the system's rigged against them, right? That we only use the severe sanction of incarceration on folks that are really dangerous.
Right.
Trying to make sure that programs meet folks if they've got a mental health issue, if they've got an addiction issue, if they've got a poverty issue. You know, what can we do there? And try to make sure that the community is safe by making sure that our resources are devoted to the violent crime. We've got over 95% conviction rate on murder, on rape, on armed robbery. But so we got to make sure the community is safe by using that severe sanction for the folks that are most dangerous. We got to make sure that the community is safe by making sure that folks that have a mental health issue or a poverty issue or a drug addiction issue get the treatment and the support that they deserve so they don't commit new crimes. And with regards to domestic violence, we're continuing to work to support victims of domestic violence to where they get autonomy over themselves, to where they can go forward and get into a healthier relationship, whether it's this one or the next. So all 70 members of our office are working on community safety. There will be other best practices that we find, whether it's this assessment center idea, great, let's find it, let's implement it. I didn't know about restorative justice in 2014, but I found out about it in 2016. We worked for 2 years, got it together in 2018. We're going to continue to work on that and hopefully move some restorative justice practices into the adult court. We just talked about the assessment center that we are working on now.
Right.
And then we're also working on competency issues, right? So you've got mental health issues, people that might be diagnosed with schizophrenia or depression or manic depression. What do you do for the folks that have competency issues, whether it's cognitive delay that they were born with, maybe they had a brain trauma.
Right.
What I've been working with over the last year, really I've been trying to get some traction on this for the last all 8 years. Really came to a focal point where we started to get some traction when a person who was incompetent to stand trial and had been to court over a dozen times attacked a nurse in the St. Thomas Midtown parking garage last April. And so working with Public Defender Martisa Johnson and Judge Melissa Blackburn and the sheriff and the mental health co-op, we're trying to say, well, first of all, how is this even happening? Well, you have to go back about 15 years because if someone commits a crime but they cannot understand the court process,
Right.
then I cannot prosecute them. Their case has to be dismissed. So what we have historically done is we send them out to the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute for a 30-day stay where they get counseling, where they might even get treatment with medications, where they get certain supports, and then they do all they can to see if they're going to be able to become competent with further counseling.
Okay.
And if they can, then once sometimes we might say, well, you know what, now that you're doing well, we don't think you're going to reoffend, we'll dismiss the case. Sometimes, well, yeah, but you did a shooting, and we may, if you were competent at the time but then became incompetent, we might still have to go forward. But 15 years ago, the state of Tennessee said, you know what, we're only going to pay for these stays at Middle Tennessee Mental Health if you committed a felony. Mm-hmm. If you're only charged with a misdemeanor, we're not going to pay.
Right.
And we're going to leave it on the local authorities across the state to pay for whatever they want to do. Metro decided that we were only going to pay for a competency examination at Vanderbilt. And if they determined that the person was not competent, we weren't going to give them any treatment.
Wow.
Which meant they'd get a letter from Vanderbilt. The defense attorney would show up. Vanderbilt says they're incompetent.
Right.
And the judge would know that we weren't going to provide any treatment or counseling. And so the judges say, we can't go forward, and dismiss the case.
Right.
So first we identified the problem. Then we said, well, how many people are there? And we've done a census of that. And different parts of the year, it's between 180 and 229 different individuals that we see frequently,
right,
who have competency issues. Not just the guy there, but there's a guy down in Antioch that defecates in the public post office, but he's incompetent, so we can't go forward against him. And so he's right back out after a night in jail. He's right back out.
Right.
And we hadn't done anything to help him.
Right.
All right. And so, well, we just got this incompetency letter last week. Well, what if it's been 3 months? What if it's been 6 months? What if it's been a year? Well, we might send him out for another evaluation, but as soon as it comes back incompetent, the judge says, well, we got to dismiss the case.
Right.
So we came up with a plan, $2.7 million a year, that would actually get competency training for 30 days, followed by housing coming out of that. And we gave that to the mayor's office. And the mayor's office said, well, that's nice, but we want to do our own study. And so they've done a deep study for 5 or 6 months, and came back with some proposals that were actually, some parts of it were good ideas, but some parts of it were unworkable. And so, we kind of regathered as a group, and Sheriff Hall said, you know what, now that my jail population is half what it used to be, I've got a building out at Harding Place, and we could turn that into a hospital the same way we did the behavioral care center. Right? And we ran the numbers on that. It was nowhere close to the $2.7 million, and we would be able to do this in-house.
Right.
The problem with that is, but wait a second, do you really want to have competency training in a jail? And so it'd have to look like the behavioral care center, where no bars,
right,
no sliding bars, cells, that kind of thing. And the public defender is rightfully concerned, well, but I don't necessarily want somebody jailed,
right,
while they're going through this treatment. But Public Defender Johnson was like, if that actually gets the treatment faster, and it's better than having them in a holding pattern waiting to get a bed available at Middle Tennessee Mental Health, we can at least try this in a pilot phase. And so we're still talking with the mayor's office. I'm hopeful that we can get the money in the budget, during 2022. We could probably get that built out and start the pilot phase as early as fall, maybe before Christmas.
Okay.
But that's another example of public investment in public safety that would make a huge difference for these folks. Don't want to get arrested every 2 or 3 weeks, right? And the nurse at St. Thomas Midtown didn't want to get beat up when she was just walking to her car. Right. So we want to, protect the community while at the same time providing needed services for Nashvillians to make sure that their lives are better.
Right.
So in the next 8 years, I want to get first 2 things on my plate. Right. Are dealing with folks that have competency issues, getting that juvenile assessment center going. I'm also working and trying to find ways that we can better support our homeless population, because we first have to provide housing, and then we've got to be able to make sure that we provide other needs, right? Whether it's addiction treatment, whether it's job training, whether it's whatever, with regard to actually meeting people where they are.
Right.
Are there some folks that might turn down those supports? I don't know, but the first thing we got to do is provide those supports. So, that's a pretty full plate.
Right.
While at the same time having 70 assistant district attorneys handling handling the major crimes.
Right.
But I'm also sure that other best practices will either occur
Right.
to some of the folks that are the great people that are working in my office. They may have an epiphany and come to me and say, "Hey, Glenn, what if we tried this?" Or we'll be able to glean best practices from other jurisdictions. But I'm excited to be DA right now at this point in time in Nashville's history, because I think it really is a period where folks are really looking to say, you know what, incarceration is not the answer on most societal ills, right? This is a time where we need to look for real solutions that put people in the middle first.
Right.
And do we have to have the severe sanction of incarceration for some folks? Yes, right? But for most of the problems that we dump into the criminal justice system, we need to find solutions that involve practices other than incarceration. So we got a great team in the DA's office, and I'm looking forward to working together for the next 8 years.
Well, District Attorney Glenn Funk, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the breakdown and the details that you gave us today. And I want to give you an opportunity for people who might want to support your campaign, may want to ask you more questions about some of the things you spoke about today. Where can they potentially support your campaign and reach out to you and your team?
Sure. The website is voteglenfunk.com, right? We're always looking for volunteers, folks that are willing to canvass or phone bank or work polls. But you can also have a contact us. And so if they have a question or want to have a deeper conversation, I have an open door policy, right? Even folks that want to have a meeting just to tell me I'm a scoundrel, right?
Right.
If you can't take criticism, then you probably shouldn't have public office, right? Because you got to be able to hear what people say, because sometimes what they tell you, they're right about, and you have to change your position or your opinion.
Right.
So if you contact me through that website, you'll get a response.
District Attorney Glenn Funk, I appreciate your time and look forward to having you back.
Okay, I'll be glad to come back anytime.
All right.